Hey guys, welcome back to Allison Unfiltered. I am so excited to bring a guest on today. I don't know if you remember the other day, my friend Heather was talking about Mr. David, who has been her recovery counselor. And I thought, how cool would it be to get Mr. David on and give us some good nuggets and tell us about his story. From what I understand, it's a really great story, so I'm excited to hear it today. So, Mr. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Allison. I really appreciate the invite. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. It's interesting to hear all of this from different perspectives, right? I've had a lot of people on that have had some really great stories of success, and it's always interesting to hear the stories of success and then the people who turn around and help other people. And hopefully soon I will have a friend of mine on who has the version from like the parental point of view, right? From the parent that had to
Hmm.
go through the child addict, right? So all these
Right.
different perspective, I think they help people. So, and you're in Louisiana, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit. I mean, just kind of start back, and I'll probably interrupt you and ask questions and stuff along the way. But
Sure.
for the most part, I just kind of want to hear like where, you know, how long you've been sober, what your drug of choice was, where you ended up, where you were rock bottom, and just kind of, I don't know, tell me about you. I want to hear the hard stuff, the stuff that's hard to talk about, but the stuff that's the grit, right? That really
Yeah.
touches us and hits home with us. So, I'm handing you the floor, Mr. David. I'm so excited to hear this.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint you, Allison. I don't really have uh, a real hard story in terms of a lot of major things. Maybe that's one of the things that kind of makes me different. A lot of people have to go through a lot more uh, harder bottoms than I did. You know. But I think it basically all comes down to the same thing about when you're ready. It's not so much that what happens, it's about how you feel about what happens. Um, I got sober, last sobriety date is October 18th, 1986. My first sobriety date was May 5th of 85. Um, Being from South Louisiana, and here it is, tomorrow's Mardi Gras here. So it is party central here in Louisiana, right?
Right, right.
And back in the day, growing up, going through high school and stuff, I thought I was obligated to get as trashed as I possibly could, and I thought that's what fun was, and I thought that was almost like a responsibility of someone who grows up in South Louisiana. So that's what I did. Um, I'm not one of those people that ever drank one or two or smoked a little bit or did anything that says, oh, okay, I'm fine. That's nice. I'm done. No, I kept going and going and going. And, you know, always trying to get as high and as drunk and as loaded as I possibly could. Um, that continued. I graduated high school, got a football scholarship to a junior college in Mississippi. And the irony of that, it was a dry county. And man, that was rough. That should have been a clue when I was struggling with that dryness that maybe I had a problem. But of course, I blamed it on them being a bunch of dry rednecks and they just don't know how to party. And, you know, anyway, completed over there, went to was USL at the time I went. And I specifically went there to party. I did eventually graduate in psychology. I had always wanted to get into the helping field and be a psychologist and, understand people and be helpful and stuff like that. Unfortunately, my addiction kind of got in the way. Um, I did graduate, but I struggled with statistics and I did try to work toward my master's, but while I was still using, and like I said, my addiction got in the way and kind of derailed that. Uh, Back in the day, it was mostly my everyday stuff was alcohol and weed. You know, But when I got into college, came across access to cocaine. And back in the day, there was a thing called Quest, and we used to get bunches of those. And looking back now, I don't know why I would take anything that would just put me to sleep. But I thought that was partying and fun, right?
Right.
And got into all of that stuff. Graduated college and still drinking and drugging every day, doing the cocaine, stuff like that.
Wow.
Um, to make a long story short, after a few years of that, I ended up dropping out of college and just struggling to kind of make ends meet and keep a job, and uh, but still drinking and smoking and doing cocaine and stuff like that. And eventually, it finally just caught up with me. Uh, it's you and I had talked previously, and I remember very clearly the day I said enough is enough. I was living with some friends on a beautiful house on the bayou, um, glass windows overlooking the bayou. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. Sun's out, bluebird sky, and I'm still wide awake as the sun comes up because we stayed out all night drinking and partying and snorting cocaine and stuff like that and couldn't go to sleep. And I remember sitting on the couch and thinking, God, I'm so tired. I wish I could go to sleep. I wish this train would end. But, I knew that the cocaine was going to decide when it was going to run out
Mm-hmm.
before I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that was enough was enough. And the next, I ended up laying on the couch with a hangover, and a Jason Robards commercial came on, and I remember overhearing it because I couldn't pick my head up to see the TV, and he was talking about how he got in a wreck on a mountain, and him being an actor, and the fear of him messing up his face wasn't enough to get him to stop drinking. And that, for some reason, that resonated with me. And shortly thereafter, I decided to go ahead and get into the state substance abuse clinic here, and that's when I decided to go for help and checked into my first inpatient treatment.
Wow. That's, it's, I think that your story is a lot like everyone's story, right? That, you say, oh, I don't want you to be disappointed because I don't have this like real hard, terrible story, right? But I think that you have the majority story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's more about how you feel rather than what actually happens. And
Hmm.
didn't have any major life changing event. I was just sick, as they say, sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Sure, sure.
You know.
Yeah, I remember obviously, I mean, I had a huge moment that got me off of drugs, but leading up to that, I was almost done with it. You know what I'm saying? Like the come down wasn't worth the high. Like I would question, okay, do I really want to do this because I know how I'm going to feel in about 8 hours, right? And is it
Yeah.
really worth it? Do I want all that crap back up in my sinuses so when I snort it back I'm going to almost throw up? Do I want to feel that? Because that's what it boils down to. You end up doing so much chasing that first high. And I mean, maybe that, the my dog dying and all that stuff that happened was like that kick in the pants that I needed. Um, but sometimes it doesn't happen like that for people. I think there's more people that just say, okay, there hasn't been a tragedy, but I don't feel good anymore, right? This isn't fun anymore. I'm not having a good time anymore. This sucks. So I think,
Right.
I think there's a lot of people like that. My husband was telling me, and my second to youngest son, he's part of this group that's Rose City Emergency Media. It's on Facebook, and they track like all the fires and ambulance and all the stuff that happens in Tyler where we live. And one of the reports that came through was there was a drug bust, and it made me think of this because you said, why would I take Quaaludes? Why would I want something to put me to sleep, right? And fentanyl is a huge drug right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it sure is.
they had a bust, 43,000 fentanyl pills busted the other night on Interstate 20 from a
Yeah,
Hispanic guy from Mexico. You know, I
yeah,
mean, it's scary, right? It's scary what people are putting in their bodies, and I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've had that stuff from from being in surgeries and things like that, and dental work, from fixing my teeth, from all the damage from all the drugs. But man, that's not something you'd want to feel all the time. How would you be productive? You know?
right, right. That's not something I really had to worry about when I was coming up. Something like the only thing that was really that scary was heroin, and I was so scared of that
Yeah.
that I clearly stayed away from that. Because that's not partying to me. That's real drug addicts.
Right.
That's the real drug addicts.
Right. Right.
I'm not that bad.
Yeah. Oh,
You
listen,
know,
if they'd have had things like fentanyl when I was, oh, I would have. I mean, that I would have probably been done. I stayed away from the heroin too, and that's what Heather and I talked about. Is she stayed away from it as well until someone else, stuck the needle in, and the needles scared me to death. So, but I can tell you, I did crack a couple of times, and that was pretty scary. So I think crack and
yeah,
heroin were like the biggest things that we had to worry about really back then. And I
yeah,
say back then, it was the '90s for me. So you were sober by the '80s. So '86, is that what you said? '86.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So.
That was after my second time in treatment. I
Mhm.
wish I could have stayed. I wish I could tell you I stayed sober my first time. Um, I was serious about getting sober.
Yeah.
You know, I was serious about it, and I went to treatment. I wouldn't say it was great treatment compared to what I know about treatment today. Um, I had a girlfriend at the time, and I ended up moving in with her, and we were together. But they say you stop growing emotionally at the age you start using. And
Sure.
since I had started like at 13, I was what 27 at the time. The 13-year-old trapped in a 27-year-old's body, and I still handle things from a relationship issue like a teenager. I was very immature, and I knew I didn't want to drink again, and I knew I wanted to stay away from all the other drugs. But I guess my go-to is still the weed, and I relapsed a few times on weed after fights with my girlfriend. Um, but I was going to AA, and I was still picking up slip chips, and I come clean about that. I got a job in the insurance business, and I got sent to Hartford, Connecticut for insurance school. And I had intended on staying sober. I didn't drink on the plane. I wasn't planning on drinking there, but I ran across some other guys that were there, young guys too. And I'd be dang gum if they didn't break out the cocaine and decide to go drinking. And so I pretty much stayed drunk and loaded the whole 2 weeks I was there, blackout drunk. I would call my girlfriend and like in the morning and say, "Hey, baby, how you doing?" And she'd go off on me because I was in a blackout and said all kind of crazy, probably mean and hateful stuff to her the night before.
Yeah.
And that went on for 2 weeks.
Good
I
old
come
drunk
back
dialing,
home.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And I come back after 2 weeks of there, and I can't come back into the house unless I agree to go back into treatment again. I said, okay, fine. I'll go back into treatment. And I'm back in AA picking up desire chips again and going to meetings. And one of the guys, it's a guy I eventually ended up working with. His name was Bill W. And he was a little leprechaun of a guy, Irish guy out of New York. He was also a sniper in the army in Vietnam back in the early days before the war had really picked up back in the 60s. And I remember him telling me at a meeting one night, he said, David, this is the only war you're ever going to win by surrendering, you know?
Wow.
And
Those
that,
are big
and that, and
words.
that, yeah, it was. And it stuck with me. And I didn't realize how profound that would be later on. Uh,
I'm
few
writing
weeks
that
later,
down. Can you say that one more time? This is the only
the
war.
only war you can win by surrendering.
That's
And so a few
huge.
weeks, yeah, it is. It really is, and it's so simple yet it's so profound.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, I wound up in an insurance school again in Hartford, and same scenario, blackout drunk the whole time. I come back on a Friday night, and my girlfriend by this time had checked herself into an IOP as a codependent and had family night that Saturday morning.
Wow.
Family day that Saturday morning, and so I show up in family day all drunk and hungover, and I guess I was kind of a punching bag for a little while, but I kind of deserved it and it kind of expected it. And probably within the week, I was back in treatment. Uh, Mind you, I knew I needed to quit drinking and drugging. And by this time, it was pretty much just the weed and the alcohol. But I went really to treatment just to save the relationship.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't go with any desperate desire to get sober. While I was there, and I had been reading the big book quite a bit because by this time I'd been in and out of the program for about a year and a half, you know. And I remember this page 62 in the big book when in that paragraph it talked about selfishness, self-centeredness that we think is the root of our troubles. Farther down in there, it talks about many of us had many philosophical convictions of the Lord, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. For some reason, that just stuck out at me because here I am in treatment again, you know, thinking I'm so smart and that I'm going to be so successful, and I am flat on my back in treatment and really going nowhere, you know. And I guess in a sense, you know, it kind of don't. That's really when I really took my honest first step. Was when I was admitting. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was really admitting my powerlessness at that point. You
Yeah.
know, because all my previous attempts to try to control this problem was failing. Here I am in treatment again.
Hmm.
You know, and right after that paragraph, it talks about we need to turn it over to God. So in a sense, I kind of did first steps 1, 2, and 3 at that moment, if you will,
Sure.
because I knew I couldn't control it, and I definitely needed God's help.
Yeah. And I learned the Serenity Prayer a very long time ago, and I'm going to say it because I don't know if everybody knows it, but God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I mean,
Amen.
that is a that is a powerful prayer, and even to this day, that's a powerful prayer, right? Um,
Yeah, I was
every
gonna say never out of style.
No,
Never out
no,
of style.
no, that is never out of style. You know, I find it very interesting, going back to your comment of what your friend told you, this is the only war you can win by surrendering. And I think that, isn't it interesting that you were in that place at that time to hear those words from that human being, right?
Yeah.
I think God's timing is amazing, always. And there's always a reason, you know?
Yeah, and I was chairing the meeting at that time, just coming back from a relapse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was questioning why am I chairing this meeting?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just come back from a relapse,
Yeah.
and there's Bill sitting over there after me sharing about my relapse, and that's when he pops up with that. You know, you're right. That's a God thing.
Oh, it's a total God thing. I mean, I I don't know. I don't necessarily believe in coincidences. I think things are how they are and how they're supposed to be and how God wants them to be. And you know, some people say, well, why would if God's so good, why would he allow all these bad things to happen to me? You know? And I think a lot of us in recovery question that, especially when we really start going through the steps, and figuring out it, when you go through those steps, there's a lot of self-reflection. And that's the
Right.
one thing that we don't want. is to have to self-reflect. That's the hardest part, right? Living through the childhood and reliving the things that happened and talking about the things that happened that brought us to the state that we're in. And I think that that's one of the hardest things for people is going through that process to even get clean. You know, what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Well, part of it is, especially if you come from a history of having a lot of abuse as a child and trauma and chaos. There's a lot of pain that comes with that, and nobody really wants to go back and look at pain. I said one of the things I teach clients is rule number one of life is seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's our nature. And so it goes against our nature to kind of look back at that. And the second part of looking at our past, like when we're doing the fourth and the fifth step, ego doesn't really want selfishness and self-centeredness, and our ego doesn't really want to look at our screw ups and our failures and stuff like that too. So
Right.
we have a lot of factors kind of working against us to doing the hard work that actually needs to get done.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And so when you came out of, you've hit your sobriety date, you've stayed sober, you ended up with a psychology degree in college, not quite your master's. Where did it take you to where you wanted to get involved in helping other people?
Well, I want to back up one one piece when I was telling you about reading that phrase in the big book that many of us had moral philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even if we would have liked to. To me, that was a really turning point in my life in my sobriety, because I think it was at that point when I finally made a decision to let go of my relationship with alcohol and drugs. That's one of the things I've learned over the course of my sobriety and as working as a counselor is the importance of it being a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach the clients, it's a relationship just like any bad romantic relationship. And
Sure.
when you know that you're done with a bad romantic relationship and you're done, you don't look back and you just walk away and you go on. You
Sure.
know, and that's kind of how I look at it with alcohol and drugs. It was a bad relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no point in going back to it. No more than I want to go back to any other bad romantic relationship.
Right.
Knowing how they are or how we are together, it doesn't work, and I have no illusions or delusions that if I ever got back in the relationship, it would be any different.
Right.
So I stay out of the relationship. So that was the turning point. And from that point on, I've never really been triggered to drink a drug since. No more than I've ever been triggered to go back into a ugly relationship again since. You
Well,
know?
and that I think there's a lot to be said there because people don't equate drug and alcohol abuse and addiction to a relationship.
But
You
it
know,
very much is. It
it
very much
is
is.
100%. Yeah, but when you're in it, like, but it's so true because it's all consuming like a relationship. It's all consuming. It's all that you think about. It's all that you want to be with. It's all that makes you feel better. It's all that makes you feel bad. It's all of the things. And I
Yeah.
guess even through my
Life totally
recovery,
revolves around it.
yeah, your whole life revolves around it, just like if you were in love.
Right.
It's interesting.
And even, in a bad relationship and you still can't get out because why? Because we think there's something good still in it. This is another thing that I've learned over the course of my sobriety and as a counselor, you know, that every relationship has pros and cons. Every relationship has pros and cons. I mean, there's pros and cons to doing this interview. There's pros and cons to the job that I have. There's pros and cons to everything, right?
Sure.
Uh, I told you when I went to treatment the very first time, I was very willing and ready to get sober.
Hmm.
Technically, what I was really ready to do was to let go of the cons of the bad relationship with alcohol and drugs. What I wasn't prepared for, and I had to learn this out later on, is that I wasn't prepared to let go of the pros. And I
Okay.
never realized that they were a package. Just kind of like if you're in a bad romantic relationship and you're getting abused or beaten or mistreated, you want to get out because of the cons. But if you get out, well, whatever pros there were, whether it was financial stability, a place to live, or whatever, you have to say goodbye to that too. And a lot of times, the unwillingness, the inability to say goodbye to the pros keeps us in the relationship as bad as we may want to get out because of the cons.
Mhm.
And at that point, I was willing to let go of the pros too. Whatever benefit I was getting from alcohol and drugs was not worth it, and I was able to walk away from it. Not everybody's like that. And
Mhm.
that's why it's really important, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of clients that I work with, to really explore the pros and cons in a black and white, assignment, if you will, so they can really see the relationship for what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of just bad relationships that I've been in the past, and there was one that it was listen, he was separated. He was still married technically, but he was separated, and I didn't really know about this until it was a little too late. But there was a conversation that we had one time, and we literally sat down and made a pros and cons list of why he should be with me or why he should stay with it, go back to his wife. And I thought
Hmm.
in that moment, I didn't, looking back, I see that like red flag, red flag, red flag, like run away, walk away, like all the
Yeah,
things, get away from this, right? And those flags are there, but somehow we convince ourselves that there's something there, that there's something still better, that I'm a fixer, right? So I've always been a problem solver. So I would meet someone and fall in love and then try to fix them, right? And that's always the worst thing. And I think that once I was sober, not only did I fall into a relationship of trying to fix people, well, if we have a baby together, we'll make this work. If I can do more of this, I've been in several not physically abusive, but definitely emotionally abusive relationships for sure. Um, and I always think, well, if I can do more, I can fix it. If I can be better, I could fix it, right? And then that evolved
right.
into an addiction of trying to fix things, and then evolved into an addiction of food. So
Yeah.
it's a vicious cycle, and what I do now, I'm like one of those people, like I'm an extremist, right? So when I do something, I give it my all, I give it everything. So when I first started this podcast, we started doing it in a studio, and I don't think the guy that said, "Hey, listen, you can use my studio and we could do this and roll with it," I don't think he actually thought I was going to follow through. I don't think he knew who he was dealing with, right? And so 25, 26 episodes later, I'm still going. Like, I'm going to find something or someone to talk to every week. And I don't think he understood that about me. So I think that when you have an addictive, and I want your thoughts on this, like when you have an addictive personality, how do you, because my family will say, "Oh my gosh, you're addicted to your phone and your work and all your Xyngular stuff and everything that you do." How do you, I don't know, how do you balance that when you already have such an addictive personality? That's because it doesn't just stop with drugs.
Right. Right. Well, it comes back down to the same thing, the pros and cons. What am I getting from it
Mm-hmm.
versus what is it costing me? And the same reason I stayed in the relationship with alcohol or drugs was because the pros were outweighing the cons.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the list of cons was extremely long, it doesn't have to have a lot of pros. It's the weight, the meaning that they carry. I find myself at times getting addicted to my phone only because it provides me a way out from my boredom,
Okay.
you know, and there's, excuse me, there's always something on the pros list that keeps us tied into it, you
That
know.
makes sense. Makes sense. So if you like for you, what do you think the hardest part about your recovery was? that you had to go back and forth, or that like, what was the hardest part of your recovery?
I don't think the going back and forth was that hard part. Um, One of the things, and I hate to, ride this horse, harp on it, because
This,
it comes back
hey,
to the
this is
pros
your
and
podcast
cons.
too, so just say what you want to say.
Well, it comes back to the pros and cons again. And almost all, usually there's only three pros on the pros side. We like the euphoria because if it didn't tickle our brain and make us feel good, we wouldn't do it. And the other two things are really numbing and escaping, which more or less is kind of the same thing, to escape our feelings. It goes back to what I said earlier, rule number one, seek pleasure and avoid pain. You know, when I decided to get sober, the first time, I wasn't prepared for that. And so I didn't know how to deal with the pain and the conflicts of the relationship I was in. Whenever I get my feelings hurt or get angry, whatever, I didn't know how to deal with those feelings.
Hmm.
You know, when I went to treatment the second time and I decided to get out of the relationship with drugs, and I still didn't know how, but at that point I really didn't care because I was committed. And I guess if there's any really dramatic thing that ever happened to me, it happened to me in sobriety, not in my addiction. I got out of treatment the Monday before Thanksgiving. I had a daughter that was born while I was in treatment. Me and that girlfriend was still together, and my daughter was born. And I'm going back to work, and I'm thinking, this is great. I got a kid. We're gonna make this relationship work. I'm going back to work, and I'm sober, and I can feel it. I'm gonna stay sober. A week before Christmas, December 18th, my daughter died of SIDS.
Oh,
I
David.
didn't even know what SIDS was. Didn't even they called it crib death back then. I didn't even know of a thing like that. And I remember getting the phone call. I was at a customer's house, and they said, "David, get home." Why? I can't tell you, David. Just go. You just need to go home. I go home and I see an ambulance there. I see a cop car there. I see my family. My mom's there. I see my girlfriend's mother's cars there. And I'm wondering what the heck is going on here. I go in the house and they had already removed my daughter, and they're trying to explain it to me what's going on. And I'm kind of in a daze and a shock. And my girlfriend's mom said, "David, don't go drink." And that's the first time I'd ever crossed my mind. I never thought about it,
Yeah.
and I guess that's the miracle of God. It never crossed my mind to go drink a drug until she made me think about it. And even then, I just kind of dismissed it because it's not an option for me. God had
Right.
removed that for me. Uh, we ended up going through the funeral. I was my first child, and I was really hurt a lot, had a lot of hurt and a lot of sadness, and we ended up having the funeral and stuff like that. And I cried, and I was very open with all of my feelings, and I tried to go back to work and stuff like that. Going to meetings, I had a really good sponsor. I was calling and talking to my sponsor. I was doing everything I needed to, and yet the pain was not getting any better. As a matter of fact, it felt like it was just getting more intense, and I didn't know what to do. Well, at this time, my girlfriend and I, after I got out of treatment this last time, we had joined an aftercare group, but it was a couples group. And we were going and still sharing and venting and doing all the stuff that we could do, and working with our counselors and stuff. And I ended up telling my counselor, I said, "Look, I don't know how much more of this can take. It's starting to get to a point where I don't know if I can take it much more." And we ended up having a second funeral in the group with a baby doll, where we ended up saying goodbye to our daughter again. But at this time, and I ended up saying goodbye to a lot of dreams that I had for her,
Oh,
you know,
wow. That just
and
gave
of
me chills.
watching her grow up and being able to play with her and, do all these things that I had envisioned of being a dad to do.
Mhm.
And I had to say goodbye to those things. And it wasn't until then, saying goodbye to the dreams, that I actually finally started getting any relief. That experience has taught me a lot of people, I think, that are stuck in grief. It's because they hadn't said goodbye to the dreams. Grieving the person is one thing. Grieving the dreams is a whole nother thing. And the reason it's such a deeper thing is because we have so much emotion tied into those dreams. We're so emotionally engaged and involved and invested in those dreams that they're hard to let go of. And if you don't really say goodbye to the dreams, I don't know if you really get to finish the grieving process. But I stayed sober through that, and I've been able to stay sober, to this day. And even that wasn't a trigger for me to use.
I'm writing this down because I mean, there's so many people that need to hear that. Like, I think that's the man, that what you just said about grieving and dreams and surrendering to the war. I mean, like, these are huge things, David, that people can take from this and apply to their life, and try to sort out and work out. Um, and something that I'm going to take back and share, with my oldest son who lost his best friend in a drunk driving accident. Um,
Yeah.
there's so many people that, and I mean, that they were best friends, right? And he can't let go because he's holding on to the dream of what if, what could have been,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
What they could have done together, how they were going to be friends together, go to, stand in each other's weddings and all of that other good stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard. I listen. I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to ask you. You know, I mean, those are some really great pieces of advice, and we didn't get to really talk
Well,
about how you got into helping other people.
well, let me add one more piece to that story.
Sure, sure,
From that experience, Allison, is that I learned that I can handle any emotion, any of life's challenges emotionally that comes. I can survive. And I think that's the biggest fear a lot of people have when it comes to dealing with emotional pain, is whether they will survive it if it comes, you know, whether it's trauma from the past, from childhood abuse, neglect, or abandonment, or whatever. There's a lot of fear of that pain, and we awfulize it in terms of, if this pain comes, they'll lock me up, or I'll never stop crying, or I'll lose my mind, or we have these ideas of what terrible, awful things will happen if this pain comes. So we have this natural inclination to fight it, which works to our detriment and kind of keeps us stuck. That experience taught me that I can deal with life no matter what, and I'll kind of pass that on to my clients. If I can survive that, you can survive it too, you know.
sure, yeah,
But I continued on in the business I was in. I'd always wanted to be a counselor, and my counselor and sponsor at the time, who was running the clinic where I went to, had a job opening, and I got back into the. He offered me a job, and I've been working in the field ever since. It started in 1989.
wow, that's so great, and I think you have um, such really good nuggets that you can give to people, and that's part of the reason they listen to podcasts, right? They're hoping to take something from it and apply it to their life. And one of the things that I say all the time in my podcast is, you have two choices in life, right? You can wake up in the morning and you can choose to be a victim of everything that's happened to you and choose to let the drugs take over and choose to let the addiction take over, or you can decide that you're going to be a survivor of those things, right? And then
Right?
you're gonna fight against it, and fight that addiction, and literally be sick and tired of being sick and tired, to the point where you become a survivor, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the hope is that you can help other people along the way. I think that's one of the biggest pieces with this. One of the things that Heather talked about and you and I talked about your, you had something that you said about rock bottom, about not forgetting your rock bottom.
Oh,
Can we talk about that for a
yeah.
second?
It's been said, at least when I was coming up in AA, the further you get away from your last drink, the closer you are to your next one. And I like the way Heather put it. It's a little different, but it basically means keep the pain of that misery that the relationship, alcohol, and drugs cause. Keep it fresh, because if you forget, which if we don't keep it fresh, then we might think, well, maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe this time it'll be different, and we can relapse over that. Keep the pain and the truth fresh. And I think about going back to some of these dysfunctional relationships that I've had over the years. You know, I remember how uncomfortable and painful they were. I don't get back in them as long when I get back in touch with the truth of how it really feels. And
Sure.
you know, you just don't go back to it when you're in touch with the reality of it and the emotional reality of it. The mind can play tricks, but if you listen to your gut,
Hmm.
you'll be okay. So keep the pain fresh. Not to
Hmm.
beat yourself up, but to remember the truth of the relationship.
Man, that's so good. That's so good. Um, I guess the last thing I want to touch on is if you are someone, excuse me, if you're someone out there that's listening to this and you're listening to me and Mr. David, and you know that you want help, what would you tell someone is the first step to where to, because some people don't even know where to go. They don't know where to turn. They don't know. I mean, I know everywhere's different. Every state's different. I'm in Texas or in Louisiana and everybody's different, but what would be the first step to tell someone this is how you take your first step to get help?
Of course, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, Narcotics Anonymous, NA, Cocaine Anonymous. There's all those 12-step programs, which I think are very valuable, and they have an important place because there's other addicts in recovery to support. You know, you can check into treatment. There's different levels of treatment. Right now, I'm doing IOP, which is intensive outpatient, which is 3 to 4 nights a week for people who don't want to, have to go away to treatment for 30 days. Some people need to be away from it for that length of time so they can get away from it, clear up mentally and physically, and be able to, get clear headed to make some decisions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some options out there, and there's different levels of there.
Yeah. I think it's always just been a question of, how do you find that stuff? Do you pick up the phone and you just Google, rehab facilities or
Oh yeah, you can do that. Just type in treatment centers, and you'll get
yeah,
all kinds of options. And there's phone numbers that you can call. There's a lot of
yeah.
you hear them advertised on the radio a lot of times. At least I do. Rehab placement where they will work with the insurance for that you have if you have it. We have a lot of places here in Louisiana that do accept Medicaid for inpatient and IO and outpatient.
Hmm.
I'm assuming the same is probably true in Texas or whatever state people are in. Um,
Yeah.
so there are options available.
Yeah, my second
Just
rehab that I was in was one in Dallas and it was called Daytop. And it was like outpatient Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and I think we went part days, half days on Saturdays. Um, it was a very interesting, like we would have things they called them marathon groups, and they would group for 3 days, like
wow.
group for an hour, sleep for an hour, like super intense stuff. And Whew, crazy stuff. My first rehab was lock up in a behavioral health unit when I
Yeah.
was 15 and out of control. Um, and I just think there's, I don't know, I think there's good things and bad things. I think people try to start things to get people in a good place, but I don't know. I mean, I guess sometimes the behavioral units are where it starts so they can figure out what you need, but I don't know if those places so much helped me or if they made me even angrier. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
I don't
It
know.
depends on. I think it really depends on how well they understand the problem, because they can't give away what they don't have, and if they don't really understand what the problem is, they don't really have much of a solution for you either. So
That's true.
it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to kind of interview them and find out what is your treatment philosophy. How do you understand addiction? How do you understand the recovery process?
Yeah.
You hear all the time, they don't get sober till they're ready, which is very, very true. I work from the position that it's a disease of self-diagnosis. That
Mm,
nobody gets well until, or really gets into treatment, and until they diagnose themselves. So my job is not to convince anybody at all, just to help them explore the relationship and come to their own decisions. Is this relationship working for you? Which is also why I harp on it and drill in the relationship aspect of this thing from the get-go.
hmm
Evaluate this relationship and come to your own decision.
hmm Well, and I can take that into, the coaching that I do with Xyngular and the weight loss and all of that too, is I had a very unhealthy relationship with food, and
Hmm.
I mean, there's so many things in life that applies to, and I guess I never really thought about it that way. And here I am, 47 years old, going, wow, I need to I need to make a pros and cons list of some things. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
just for my own self, for sure. I think this just makes you take a step back and just kind of reevaluate things in life, for
sure.
sure.
Well, sure. We always have to kind of ask what's driving the bus? What's the motivation? What need is being met here? If I do this, what need is being met? And if we're really good at, it took me probably 3 years in sobriety before I really felt like I understood a lot of my selfish motivations. Of really being able to look at myself and own my behaviors and attitudes before I could really get a grip on what was motivating me to do things,
Yeah.
you know. But the
Yeah.
question still to me is still, what's driving the bus? What need is being met?
Well, and so much of it is what you said, those three pros: euphoria, numbing, and escaping. I
Yeah,
mean, so many of us, I mean, you've got the mom who comes home and she's 30 pounds overweight and she's got a muffin top because she comes home every day stressed out from her job and drinks a bottle of wine to de-stress.
yeah,
You know, I
yeah,
mean that is so typical in the world that I live in coaching and health and wellness. It's one of the biggest things is, well, I have to have my wine,
yeah.
and so I think this is going to be something that's going to help in a lot of ways and a lot of people that are listening. So, oh
And
my gosh, you have
you can substitute that with food for the same thing. What's the
sure,
reason? Are you really eating out of hunger because you're hungry, or are you really eating because stress, relaxation,
yeah,
calm your nerves?
yeah. Well, it's normal for so many people to celebrate with food and alcohol. It's normal
Absolutely.
for Yeah, for people to celebrate with food and alcohol, for people to be in a bad mood and have a pity party with food and alcohol, and there's so many things that um there's so many things and reasons that we gather, and so much of it revolves around food and alcohol parties, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Especially around here right now, Mardi Gras.
oh, yeah, especially with Mardi Gras. Well, I have to tell you, I love your Bayou accent. I think it's the cutest thing in the world. I love it. It's
Uh,
been so fun listening to you.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and thank you for being on here, and thank you for sharing your story and sharing some really good nuggets. I mean, that's some really good stuff, David. I mean,
Thank you, Allison.
I'm gonna take some of that to the bank myself.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, this has been great. So I'm excited. I can't wait till it comes out next week. And do you have any other things that you want to share? Any other nuggets that you can think of that? that helped
Well,
you
I
along
guess,
the way?
well, there's a couple of other things. It kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. I tell my clients rule number one is seek pleasure and avoid pain. But I think, and that's as powerful as a rule that is. Rule number two is probably just as powerful, except harder to see. And rule number two is holes need to be filled. Holes
Oh,
need to be filled. Uh, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying, what need is being met. Usually there's something, as you've heard the expression, Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's something missing inside, we're going to fill it up with something healthy or unhealthy.
sure, sure.
And rule number three is always about power and control. We're always trying to get control over things to not be the underdog. And I guess that's another thing that I would probably add to this is one of the things I try to pass on to my clients is there's a top dog and underdog relationship to everything. In all relationships have a top dog underdog quality. Healthy relationships, the partners interchange top dog to underdog and vice versa, without much problem. But then you have some people who cannot give up the top dog position out of the fear of vulnerability that the underdog position takes. In terms of our relationship with alcohol and drugs, what I pass on to the clients is the insanity aspect is thinking that we're the top dog when the reality of it is alcohol and drugs is a top dog over me. And it
Yeah.
kind of goes back to my friend Bill's statement of this is the war you only you can win by surrendering. And surrendering to that reality is that it's the top dog and it's okay. I don't need to fight that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really good stuff too. You got goosebumps on me, Mr. David.
Well, thank you, Allison.
That's greatness.
Hope this is helpful.
Yeah, no, listen, I value your opinion and your expertise, and who knows, I may just call you one day and say, okay, Mr. David, how do we do?
Anytime, Allison. Anything I can do to be helpful.
Yeah.